And here's our last lesson of this chapter. We're going to bring back looking at equations, or solving for x or solving for y or whatever variable is missing. So remember the three things about equations. What you do to one side, I heard you say it, you got to do to the other. You're trying to get the variable alone on one side, and you have to use inverse operation to do it. Let's get our notes, or today's date and page number written down to move on. All right, so here are four equations that we did in the previous chapter. Let's see if you can solve them. I encourage you to show your work in your notes before putting down the answer. Here are the four answers I hope you got, and I showed my work. Aren't you proud of me? So for number one, we had to subtract both sides by 6. X equals 2. Okay. For number 2, we are going to divide both sides by 3, x equals 5. For number 3, we're going to multiply both sides by 5, x equals 20. And for 4, we're going to add both sides by 8, and x equals 20. So one of these is wrong, and hopefully you can find my mistake in my work that I showed you. If you can't find it, that's a bummer, but if you can find it, you can show me the issue when you're finished and you show me your notes. There may be something in it for you. All right, let's move on. Let's start by looking at a scenario that we can see up here, which is solving integer equations dealing with pyramids, I guess. So the entrance to the Great Pyramid of Khufu is 55 feet above ground. You actually have to go 55 feet up the pyramid before you can go in. The underground chamber is 102 feet below the ground. So from the entrance, what is the distance to the underground chamber? Well, here we're going to have to do something with two numbers. Basically, to solve it, we know that we're going down below ground, so that would be a negative 102. That's our final resting place, no pun intended. But we started at 55, and we have to add to 55 what it was that we went down by. Well, we know that we're going to have to use negative numbers to solve here by subtracting. So if we had a negative 102 and we subtracted 55, you know that you're getting more negative. So your answer here is negative 157 feet, or we say 157 feet below the ground. So we're going to work on problems like this today. So let's talk about some rules that we have to remember. And we're going to go back to our property rules and the identity property. Remember, for addition, it allows you to simplify different numbers in different steps to be able to get the same kind of answer. With addition, whenever we're identifying 0, we know the answer is going to be whatever the other number is. And with the identity property multiplying by 1, you already know what the number is. It's the number you multiplied by 1 by. Don't need to write it down, just a reminder as we move forward today. Okay, now let's get into some work and let's start to solve these. Remember the three things we always have to do. 1, we have to get the variable alone. 2, what you do to one side, ... And for 3, you're going to have to use inverse operation to solve. So let's see how these work with a problem like negative 8 plus y equals negative 13. Well, let's first take a look now at how you work this out. First thing you're going to want to do is write down the problem. Now, instead of looking at the operation in between the negative 8 and the y, look at the symbol that's to the left of the number. Since this is negative 8, that's the same as saying minus 8. So how do you get rid of a negative 8? How do you get onto the number line to 0 from 8? Well, if it's negative, you have to add 8 to get to 0. So what you do to one side, you do to the other. So we're going to add 8 to both sides. That leaves y alone on the one side. And now we're doing negative 13 plus 8. And when we do that, we know that the negative number has a higher absolute value, so the answer is still going to be negative, but it's negative 5 when you subtract the 2. Now, how can we check to see if our work is right? We plug and chug. So plug negative 5, the value you found, back into y. And if you did negative 8 plus negative 5, Both are negative, so you're going to get more negative at negative 13. So it works. This is correct. So have this down as an example, probably the 3 notes I wrote on the side too, before moving on. Let's look at another problem. So this one we're looking at n minus 2 equals negative 8. Well, it looks pretty similar to a lot of the other things we've done in previous chapters. So the first thing you should be doing is rewriting the problem, n minus 2 equals negative 8. And then, what do you have to do to both sides to get the variable alone? Well, since it's minus 2, you have to add 2. It's the same as saying n negative 2. You still have to add 2 to both sides, because what you do to one side, you got to do to the other. So now n's left alone, and on the other side we have negative 8 plus 2. Now remember, the negative number has a larger absolute value, so our answer is going to be negative. But we're really subtracting the second number of negative 8 minus 2 gives you negative 6. And again, how do we check to see if negative 6 is correct? Plug and chug. We put a negative 6 for n minus 2, and that would give you negative 8. Here's another one. So we're looking at negative 2 plus y equals negative 7. So first, write the problem. Second, see what it is we have to bring over. We have to get rid of the negative 2. So think of that as minus 2. What's the opposite of minus? That's addition. So add 2 to both sides. Again, now we have y alone, and you have negative 7 plus 2 that you still have to solve on the other side. Remember, negative 7 is still a larger absolute value than 2. So your answer is going to have to match that sign being negative. So negative 7 plus 2 is the same as doing 7 minus 2, which will give you a negative 5. Again, you can check your work simply by plugging in negative 5 into the original problem and solving it. And that would give you the exact answer of negative 7 on both sides. So I have 8 problems here I want you to do. They all have to do with either subtracting or adding. So use your skills in those. I will show my work so you can see how I did them when you come back. Good luck. And I hope you got the same answers I did. For 1, I got 12 because I had to add 3 to both sides. For number 2, I got negative 5 because I had to add 8 to both sides. Again, negative 13 is larger than 8 as far as absolute value goes, so it has to be negative. For 3, I had to add 12 to both sides. I got 9, because here the 12 is a larger absolute value than the negative 3, so you know your answer will be positive. For number 4, I got 9, because I had to add 2 to both sides. For number 5, I subtracted 2 from both sides and got negative 9. For 6, I had to add 9 to both sides. I got 30. And for 7, I had to add 10 to both sides. 10 is a larger absolute value than negative 2, so the answer is a positive 8 when you subtract them. And finally, for 8, I had to subtract 15 from both sides. H equals 10. I hope you got the same answers, and hopefully you can tell my work matches the kind of work you showed in your notes too, to make sure you're doing a good job showing your work. So now that we've looked at how to use negatives in subtracting and adding equations, let's look at some multiplying and dividing examples. So here we have 4 times n equals negative 20. Now you know that you're going to have to first write out the problem and then find what's the inverse operation of multiplying. That's dividing. So we have to divide both sides by the coefficient, which is a number next to m, and that'd be 4. Now remember from our previous lesson, we know that now we're just doing negative 20 divided by 4, and with division and multiplication, if both signs are the same, it's positive. If they're different, it's negative. And that's why this one is negative, because negative 20 and positive 4 are opposite signs. Again, how can we check our work? Plug and chug. Put negative 5 in for m. 5 times 4 is 20, but since 1's negative, it's a negative 20, so it's correct. Put this in your notes if you want to have a good example. So here's one of a division problem. So we have x divided by 3 equaling negative 7. So we have to figure out what the inverse operation is of division, and we know that that's going to be multiplying. So using our fact families of 3, 7, and the other value, we can check our work when we're done. So we're going to multiply both sides by 3. That gets x alone, and on the other side it's 3 times negative 7. Both signs are different, so the answer has to be negative, and 21 is what 3 times 7 gets you, negative 21. Again, to check it, just plug and chug negative 21 in for x. 3 goes into 21 7 times, but since the signs are different, you get negative. Let's look at another one. So here we're looking at 3n equals negative 15. So we have to get n alone, so we have to do the opposite of multiplying, which is dividing. Let's divide both sides by the 3 that's next to the n. When we do that, we're basically seeing how many times 3 goes into 15, which is 5. But again, the signs are different, so our value has to be a negative 5. And we can check that simply by plugging and chugging. What's 3 times 5 give you? 15. 1's a negative, so it's negative 15. Your fact families work together when you're checking your work. All right, now that you've seen some of mine, let's see what you can do with these 8. They're either multiplying or dividing. With the dividing ones, I use the slanted fraction bar again to work with these. So use the inverse and come back when you're done. All right, here are the answers I got, and you can see my work. So I did the inverse, and then I had to just check to see if they had the same signs for a positive result or opposite signs for a negative result. I apologize for number 8. I actually meant to do that one as d or negative 12d, so you had the divide for the inverse, but oops, that's a big number for you to work, but you should have got negative 1,728. All right, let's get moving on now that you're kind of getting this, I hope. Here's your box of thought. I need you to answer these with full sentences. Do your best, and when you're done, you can move on. Here's your quiz. You have 5 questions. I want you to do your best. Show your work. That's the only way you're going to make sure you don't make mistakes. All right, now that you've finished your quiz, make sure you come over to me and get checked off. Again, this was our last lesson of this chapter, so you'll have your 3rd quiz after this, and then you're on to reviewing and you have the test. Good job. Good luck. We'll see you next chapter.